Hello guys and welcome to Time Hack. I'm your host, the Minuteman, and on today's show we're going to discuss field watches and various points about field watches that hopefully you'll find interesting, and maybe it'll spark some conversation in the comments section. But before we get to that, would you mind liking, sharing, subscribing? It would help out the channel a lot. I know all three of you are fervent followers of my material, and I really appreciate that. I did lose someone in my absence. I know I talked about it before, but I've recently taken on a pretty challenging and demanding school within the Army National Guard, and it's going to take some time for me to balance my civilian life with my military life again. But I look forward to sharing that with you at some point. I won't tell you what the school is just yet, because if I drop the ball on this, I want to go out silently. Hopefully I'll make it through, and it'll give me some great content to talk to you guys about. We have a special guest today on the show to give his input on field watches. We have the Cold War Patriot, CWP. At least that's what he wants to call himself when his channel finally takes off. But CWP, would you mind giving the audience some background information on who you are?
Yes. So hey, Minuteman, thank you very much for asking me to contribute to your channel. I'm really excited about this. This is a first for me. I'm really looking forward to seeing what kind of feedback you get about this. So my background, 30 years active duty. I started out in the height of the Cold War era, stationed overseas in Germany. I started out as an infantry officer, and pretty much have done everything up through brigade level as an active duty officer. Multiple duty assignments around the world, 7 combat deployments, and so I like to think I have a generally pretty good idea of what it takes to have good gear in the field. And of course I share the same interest that you have with watches and horology in general, so I'm really kind of looking forward to discussing what the topic that you've got lined up for today.
Yeah, and I think you're going to be an excellent addition to the show. One, you have that officer experience. I myself being an enlisted soldier, there's two different. Obviously, we're all soldiers, but they're two different tiers, and we both see the job differently from different perspectives. And I think that's going to give a valuable perspective in the future on different topics. Also, with you being on active duty, active duty is seen as like the premier force. Like, you guys do it 24/7, and you should be seen as a premier force. But it lets us kind of compare the two different components: active guard versus guard reserve, all that. So I think it's an invaluable source of knowledge. But enough of that. What do you have on your wrist?
Great question. Wrist check today. I have, actually largely due to your influence, I have the sort of retro Casio G-Shock Square all metal, which is an homage to really what you could argue to be the first modern Army field watch, which was the original G-Shock that was fielded or sold by Casio in the early to mid 80s. So that's what I've got on my wrist today. Again, I have this, I think, because of your influence, and I've loved it ever since I got it.
Yeah, that thing is probably not the best field watch, because it's gonna get buggered up pretty quick there.
Yeah.
But that's like $500, right?
Yes, it was like $490 from a gray market dealer.
So if that got lost in the field, you'd be a little.
I'd be a little. I would not be happy about it. I would not wear it. You're right. This is a little shinier than what might be good for a good field watch.
But I like that. If you were to, and I'm thinking from somebody who works for the military on the civilian side, going into office, you want something nice on your wrist, but this kind of says, hey, look, I'm here's an office worker, but I've got a past. I got a tool watch, a genuine tool watch for
right.
me.
So it has all the attributes you would want in a good field watch, except that it's chrome and shiny.
But
right?
It's got that a kind of
Right.
dress appeal. That you
Yeah,
can wear
you're
it
right.
on.
It's a tool watch with a dress appeal. It's certainly every time I wear this, it is it's a conversation starter, right? Because you don't normally see dress. The joke is this is the Rolex of Casio
Yeah.
G Shocks, right?
Or what is that? Damn, I can't think of the watch now. The Royal Oak. I don't know who produces the Royal Oak. It's this giant. Actually, I'll pull up a picture of it.
Adamant Piguet,
Yeah.
I think is the
Let's. Wow. Well, I can already tell there's gonna be some editing here. Royal Oak watch. Who done it? Oh yeah, this guy here.
Adamant Piguet.
Yeah.
Audemars Piguet, yeah. Yep.
So I can kind of see just the square angular, even though I think that this case shape is of Casio's own.
Yeah, and I think it predates that one. I think, but I don't know.
Right.
I'm
And
not sure.
we actually have a couple more square G-Shocks to discuss, and we have probably the one that I would recommend for field use, but we'll get to that later. Let's go ahead and get into start the real discussion here at hand, field watches, and we'll start off by discussing what makes a field watch. I've got a watch box here with how many watches we got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's 10 watches here, and they're all different. We've got manual wines, we've got vintage, we've got quartz, automatic, and what makes one watch a office watch or a dive watch and not a field watch, and vice versa?
Yeah, so one of the interesting things is because when I first came on active duty, it was the height of the Cold War, but it also aligned with sort of what some in the horology community consider the Quartz Crisis, which was the late 70s, early 80s, I guess.
Yeah.
So analog watches were a little passe, and they certainly were passe, or in the Army, right? You didn't really wear an analog watch out to the field, and digital watches were the natural choice to wear. And at the time, there were not a lot of brands that you could consider had the attributes that you would want in a field watch. So you had to take what you got, and there were a couple of standout brands that had what were the inklings of the qualities that make a good field watch. Casio, the G-Shock came out. That's a good example. And Timex, who's been a watch brand for an extremely long time, and has certainly been affiliated with the military for a very long time. Both Casio and Timex made digital watches that were rugged enough that they had some of the qualities that you would need, or you might think you would need in a field watch. And at the time, there wasn't really a thing, you bought a watch and hopefully it did the job. Mm-hmm. So some of the things that it needed to have to be able to do the job where it had to be reliable, right? So digital watches had that in spades. It had to be rugged. And a lot of digital watches in the 80s would not fit the category of being rugged. And again, those two brands, Casio and Timex, that came out with the G-Shock, and in Timex's case, it was the Iron Man watch. Mm-hmm. They were natural choices to pick. And at the time, when I was looking for a watch, I was destined to go off to Ranger School, and I knew I needed a watch that was inexpensive but reliable and had certain features on it that I could rely on. So, for example, that had a long-lasting battery, that it had a backlight so that
Not to interrupt, but I think older watches burn through batteries pretty fast. Was that like how often would you change a battery, would you say? Yeah,
so a great question. And only recently have I kind of refreshed myself on how frustrating initial digital watches were. If you could get a year out of a battery, you were doing pretty well. Mm. I guess it wasn't until Casio came out with what's the WR1, the very basic Casio watch. Did watch batteries? Could you count on watch batteries lasting for a long time? But by the mid to late
This was
80s,
10 years from Casio to
yeah.
battery life.
But prior to that, yeah, you were looking at replacing a watch battery once a year, on a good watch, right? So when watches came out where they would last 2 or 3 years. Now you're talking about a watch that you can use in the field for an extended period of time and not be concerned that it's going to fail on you. Mm-hmm. And of course, like, okay, why do you need a watch in the field? Well, fundamentally, a couple of things, right? You need to know, when you're doing a military operation, you need to know when you need to start that military operation. You need to know when you need to be on the objective to be able to ensure that whatever your mission is synchronized with other missions across the battlefield. And that's why, a field watch is a basic piece of field kit. Right, and again, there were some qualities in a field watch that you really needed to have, but were pretty basic. Again, a backlight. Can you see the watch at night? And a lot of the digital watches at the time had these very weak backlights. So when Casio came out with their watch, and when Timex came out with their Indiglo watch, all of a sudden you can see all of the features, all of the information that's presented on that watch.
And so I imagine if you had to check your time, say you're a PL or squad leader, whatever you are, and you need to be on top of the next time hack, to use the name of my channel here, you have to use your red lens, I'd imagine, if you couldn't see it.
Right.
And that's kind of a pain in the butt.
Yeah, and so one of the things that people did, and I picked this up from another guy that I was going to Ranger School with, is you would have to modify your watch to make it a more optimal field watch. And a couple of things, like, for example, I've had this Ironman since about that time, but this is not the one I took to Ranger School. I disassembled this watch, all the components, and spray painted them black. So, because at the time I thought that the glare of some of these more bright components would alert the enemy to our location, and I cut a piece of red film and placed it over the face, so that when I hit the backlight, I didn't need a red lens flashlight to look at it.
Okay.
It already had. Now let me ask, Minuteman, let me ask you a question. Why do we use a red lens flashlight in the field?
It's supposedly something about your natural night vision. It doesn't affect it.
Yeah, so that's actually the right answer, right? Normally the answer people give is because red lens light isn't as detectable as white lens light to the enemy, right? But that's an urban legend.
I will absolutely. I was just on a night land nav course, and some kid was running around with his headlight on. It was red. I see you from a mile away, but
right. So a red lens supposedly doesn't destroy your night vision. I think that is true, and I cut a piece of red contact film and placed it on the face of the watch, so that I didn't need to use a red lens flashlight to take a look at it. So in Ranger School, you have to do a lot of prep to be ready to go to that school, and getting your watch ready was an important part of it.
And having a watch that was gonna make it, like, people fail physically there, and the watch can't do that either.
Exactly. So and then which leads to other important features that a field watch should have. Is it water resistant? Right. Can it handle being in a monsoon for 12 to 24 hours? Can it handle walking through the swamps of Dahlonega, Georgia, of Eglin, Florida, and being submerged for extended periods of time, and then when you need it, actually still being able to operate? And
temperature changes.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean,
the Army loves their temperature changes.
So. Right. I mean, the coldest I have ever been in my life was in Ranger School in the mountains of Dahlonega, Georgia, and that was probably March, the March time frame. And then after that, we went to Florida, and it was, So, and of course, the other thing that was really good about this Indiglo, this Timex Indiglo Ironman watch was it was very inexpensive. So if it broke, it was almost disposable, and on a young soldier's salary. That made all the difference in the world. So at the time, back in the late 80s, those two watches, and the one I bought was the Timex Indigo Ironman, and I loved it so much that I have kept one ever since, and have carried this watch throughout my military career to include combat operations.
So, I mean, you hit on a lot of the major points that I have set for myself. I've kind of, since I've been doing the channel a little bit, I've had time to narrow it down. So for me, we're going to talk about narrowing it down to 3 traits. For me, my 3 traits are, is it affordable, is it reliable, and is it legible? Those are the 3 things that I think are absolutely vital in a field watch.
Yeah, well said. I wish I were as succinct as you.
I had time to practice.
But regarding those criteria, I think that this watch and when it came out in the mid to late '80s, hit all of those criteria really, really well. Yeah, I mean, a couple of things that have changed since then. This watch is actually pretty small. This is probably what do you think? It's probably about a 36 millimeter, maybe.
The screens are like the same size.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's true. That's a good point. And field watches nowadays, I think, tend to be a little bigger, and for good reason.
You can see this one. This is a Casio World Time, and this is my AIT watch. But yeah, so like I guess what you're trying to get at was smaller screen, less legible.
But fundamentally, the criteria you've established there, I think, are a bedrock criteria for all field watches, and even back then, this watch met them.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just gonna get into define my 3 criteria a little deeper there, and try to provide some context behind it. For me, the number 1 thing is how affordable is it, because we are talking soldiers here, and especially if you're on the junior enlisted side. If you're an E1, I hope you get out of that fast. That's terrible. But even if you're, a wealthy E4, it's like for my drill check, I'll see $250 a month, and I think that's after the taxes. That's the money I get to go to drill, go pay my TRICARE, replace any gear that might have gone missing, which I already lost some gear doing the civil disturbance missions in DC, so I'm looking at like a potential cost of $500. It's a sleep system. Not the whole sleep system, it's just one sleeping bag, the winter sleeping bag. Anyway, so if you're taking out these watches and I'm rolling out there with a sweet Omega Speedmaster as a E4 and I lose the thing, I will hate myself because I can't replace it. For me, my first, it's not really my first watch, but my first watch was a Casio Pro Trek that my father got me. He's like, oh son, you're joining the military, I'll get you a proper military watch, a proper field watch. And this thing was sweet. It had a barometer, altimeter, it had a compass. And I show up to basic because I didn't know anything. I'm letting the drill sergeants get into my head as any kid would, And they're like, if you have any of this on your watch, you're done. You're getting recycled. Article 15, jail time. And I'm just like, well, yeah, I'm going to throw this away. And I chucked it into the garbage can instead of going to the amnesty box, which I'd never seen anyone use the amnesty box. They didn't even let us know it existed. But, right, so I chucked that out. And then I had to go buy my own. And I don't even remember which one was my basic training watch, but I think it was this one by Casio. It's got a vibrating alarm, which I put a lot of faith into, and it sucks. It does not wake me up. Now, at best, you could be slightly nodding off while pulling security, maybe, and then, it'll buzz and let you know, hey, you should wake up your battle buddy. He's taking a shift. So that's my... So anyway, I was just going on about affordability there.
Yeah, so as I recall, back when I first joined the military, I was making $1,200 a month as a second lieutenant, and as I recall, this watch was less than $30, which was
$30.
Yeah, $30. That is a more than reasonable price to pay for a watch that has essentially lasted for 30 years.
That's probably about like $50 today.
Yeah, probably.
So it's on par with the Casio G-Shock,
yeah.
the DW15. 5600.
And it's kind of tough to. And by the way, one of the other features that I should have mentioned here, that a feature that a military watch should have, but not necessarily a field military watch, is this. That both the G-Shock and this Iron Man have stopwatch features, right? And
Oh yes.
When you're giving a PT test, you need that. And
You're taking the PT test.
Right, exactly right. You want to have that as a feature. Yeah, is it useful in the field? Maybe not, but it's certainly a necessary attribute for a military watch to have that chronograph feature on there, that stopwatch feature that you can use for things like that. So, and then of course another thing that you kind of pointed out was the alarm, right?
Yes,
when you're
alarm features.
the alarm feature, right? And now, from a field watch perspective, an alarm, probably less than optimal because you're trying to be quiet, you're trying to be stealthy, and your little alarm going off on the hour or whatever the case may be is definitely not optimal. But both in those watches, you could turn that alarm feature off, so that wasn't really a problem.
And you might not know about this as an officer, but in the barracks, you are going to get sock partied if your watch goes off like way too early. You're getting destroyed. So check that when you go to the barracks.
Yeah, that's a good point. You're right. I didn't experience that.
So let's talk about durability kind of briefly. I think we've already kind of harped on that enough, but this one. Let's see. Actually, this one's my AIT watch, and it's already kind of buggered up. I actually went to the NCO Academy with me as well. That was more of a gentleman's course than basic and AIT was. But in AIT, we were at the beach, and they had us do a pretty soft road march on the beach, which kids were complaining about bitterly. But then they smoked us in the beach, and that sucked. So we're getting scuffed up in the beach, and I know the sand scuffed up my crystal on this Casio World Time. But this World Time was cool because I can track so many different time zones. This is a good feature in a military watch if you're going different places overseas, but I wouldn't say it's critical. But it did let me know what time it was back home. So anytime I was thinking of my loved ones, it was nice to just know, oh, it's this time over there, and it kind of took you away. It took you to that place. Which I think is important. And I want to discuss morale effects that watches can have later on. But that was one effect on my morale, just be like, oh, it's this time back home for my wife. And it kind of took me there.
Yeah, that's a good point. At the time, for me, that wasn't a feature I needed, right? And although I came to appreciate that a little more when my first duty assignment out of Ranger School was Germany. Mm-hmm. And and I met the woman that was about to become my wife. She's back in the States. That's a feature that would have been useful. And she actually bought me a watch that had a multiple time zone feature that unfortunately I've since lost or has been stolen in one of the many moves.
That was the Rolex GMT, right?
Yeah, no, I wish it were. But your mom bought me a super nice watch that had I don't even remember the brand anymore, but it had two watch faces on it that you could set with independent time zones, and it was nice because, yeah.
So, we've discussed it has to be affordable and it has to be durable. We kind of hit on legible a little bit. I think we're kind of beating around the bush about the dial size. That has a factor in legibility. But what I'd like to talk about is indices and numerals. Should they be like, we've got a Seiko SKX here, and it just uses different little indexes, little dots. Versus if you looked at this Hamilton, it uses Roman numerals. Or if you looked at a digital display, what would you say about somebody who would use this watch? Would you be able to tell time faster on a Seiko SKX versus a digital watch?
So I would say that the digital watch wins hands down.
Yeah.
Hands down. Now that Seiko watch, that SKS, that's a beautiful watch. Certainly the features on it, it's a dive watch, and the features on it are good for diving. But when you've got a split second to be able to look at the time to make sure that you're trying to figure out when you need to be at that objective rally point, which is your last covered and concealed position before you move to the objective, and you're trying to figure out, am I on time, am I late, am I early? The last thing you want to do is sit there and go, okay, that's where a digital watch, I think, leads the pack when it comes to legibility. Is it as sexy as an analog watch? Probably not. But from a field perspective, hands down the better option.
Yeah, I agree. And I think our forefathers, I mean, obviously, I got a Bulova watch made in West Germany. So this potentially could have been picked up by a GI, the PX. And it's just got your Roman numerals. So they had to be that good. There's no backlight. There's no lume. So you had to be on top of your
game.
And
that's an absolutely beautiful
watch. And it's a tiny dial too. So,
yeah, it's very small.
So it kind of goes against everything we just discussed. I'm sure at the time it was probably very durable for its competitors.
Yeah, I mean, and if you take a look at what was coming out at that time, right? what did pilots use? Who made the Flieger watch?
I got the Junkers you gave me.
Yeah, well, the Flieger watch was a much larger, in World War II and forward, the Flieger watch was a much bigger face, much bigger dial for that very reason, because while you're operating the aircraft, you really don't have time to look at, to study that watch, and you just need to be able to take a look at it quickly and determine what's going on. And I think when it comes to the evolution of field watches, that bears out. So, this is probably a 33 millimeter, 34 millimeter in that range,
probably.
quite small.
Yeah.
And then if you compare it to the field watches that we're talking about, I have both this 80s model Ironman and then probably a 90s model or a 2000s model Ironman, and you can already see they're getting a lot bigger. And when you take a look at field watches now, they're monsters.
Yeah, this thing here,
right?
That's probably a 30 or 43.
Yeah, something in that range. And I think that makes sense. I really do. I think that particularly with the amount of information that is now available on your wrist, right? Back in the day when a soldier was operating work, on the beaches of Normandy, the D-Day invasion, the only thing he could know was the time.
Yeah.
But now,
you didn't know. Some of the cool watches can even help you in assessing stuff for your op orders. If you wanted to check on the weather, essentially, you don't have a weatherman or anything like that. You want to double check. You use barometric pressure. If you've studied it, if you know what you're talking about, you could use that function on your watch and be like, hey guys, you might want to take that poncho with you.
Exactly. And that's an incredible thing. That is an incredible resource and a tool to have on your wrist. The ability to verify what your heading is so that you're going in the right direction. The ability to understand what the elevation is and what impact that's going to have on a soldier's ability to carry the mission load, right? I mean, this is all really vital information. And, the state of technology nowadays that's available to your average soldier and inexpensively, right? Yeah, that ProTrek watch you were talking about was probably in the $350 range, which is a little expensive, but you can still get an inexpensive watch with a lot of those features. And then if it's solar powered, you never have to worry about replacing the battery, et cetera.
And I have to agree as far as, I don't know if I'm just a slow individual or not, but sometimes if I look at, even with Roman numerals, I don't get the minutes as accurate as I want or the seconds as accurate as I want. With a digital display, I have that. And sometimes the seconds and minutes really do matter. Less mundane than combat, but in riot control or something like that. If you're out on the line and you're getting pelted with pee and poop and whatnot, you want to get out of
something
there.
else I have not experienced.
So you're like, all right, relief's supposed to be here at 1900. They need to get here fast, and you're just worried about getting the next guy here to go catch his pee. Or, more realistically, when you need to rotate your guys out for chow, for riot situations, being there with your kit on. In the summer when I did the civil disturbances in the summer of 2020, which were pretty aggressive, I had to rotate my guys out. I was I was the alpha team leader, and I had to step in for the squad leader occasionally when he had to leave for different briefings. But I had to make sure I rotated my guys out so they weren't passing out from the heat, which are just, I mean, that is the event that they are looking to capitalize on. The soldier goes down, there's a weak point in our perimeter, and they come in and they go, commit whatever domestic violence they wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, from a soldier perspective, you'd be hard pressed to identify a piece of equipment other than your weapon that is more important than a watch.
Right. I would say a spoon. It's pretty versatile, but at the end of the day, I can use my hands.
Right.
Yeah.
The old rule of thumb was, when I was going to, Ranger School, for every mission order, you always had to have three things: a pencil, some notebook, and your watch. Mm-hmm. Right? That was the fundamental three things. Everything else, you can sort of wing it from there. And that's a lesson I've carried. It's so important. I'll tell you a quick story that is so important that when I first reported to my first assignment, 1/6 Infantry in Vilseck, Germany, and I met the battalion commander, and he says, "Hey, JT, I only have a couple of rules. And the first rule is if I call for you on the radio, you better answer. And the second rule is you always make your start points, right?" Mm-hmm. And he said, if you don't make your start point, and in military SP, what that means is that's the moment when you have to cross the line of departure to go on a mission. He said, if you do not meet your SP, you're relieved. So the importance of measuring time was essentially the first lesson I learned in my first unit as an infantry officer. And obviously I've never forgotten it. Mm-hmm. And needless to say, I never missed an SP.
Right, and so that's not solely to officers, obviously. Because as enlisted soldiers, we have our job, and then as NCOs, we need to support our officers. And so if the lieutenant says, "This is the time hack, I need this done," you as an NCO need to go ahead and know the time as well, get your guys and worry about that segmented task you were given and hit that time hack for your PL so you don't screw him or her. And that way, we can just get the mission done together, because he or she's got their own fish to fry. You got to worry about the Joes and make sure that things are going on time for them.
Exactly. Yep.
So, as far as a less serious topic, morale watches is something that I've kind of, I'm coining it myself. I don't know if anyone else has done this. But I've got a G-Shock here. It's a Pokemon G-Shock. Super goofy. It's got bright colors. So yeah, it's nothing like major bright colors. It's overall black, but I'll show a picture of it. I'll supplement most of this with pictures, but it's bright and it's whimsical. So if I'm hating my life out somewhere, I've never taken this to the field because I like it too much, but that could give me my break. And I did purchase a watch in DC when I was up there for the recent civil disturbance. And it's this Timex World War I style watch. And it was just goofy, and it did the job. And, if I was just feeling like I was hating my life up in D.C., like it sucked. And I couldn't look at my phone because I needed to keep my head on a swivel. But, if I needed a quick break of standing out there for I don't even know how many hour shifts, like the first initial, we definitely pulled like 18 plus hour days. But just that little break with that watch helped me out a lot.
Yeah, so I didn't realize you were going to kind of go down that path. And a morale watch, I bought myself a morale watch as well. And I got deployed to Afghanistan. And I didn't want to take my tried and true Iron Man. I wanted a new watch. I wanted a morale watch, something. And I did some research and found this the Casio Oceanus Cachalot watch, which is a titanium watch. It's solar atomic, and it had all the features. It's got dive watch, stopwatch, etc. But more importantly, I could put multiple time zones on this watch. So I had this dress watch, this high-end watch that I took to Afghanistan with me, and when I wanted to, I could tell what time it was back in Germany, so I could talk to my wife and kids, who I was missing on a daily basis. And for me, that was my morale watch. Right now, this I would not consider to be a suitable field watch. Not really. But it served the purpose for me while I was downrange because it was something that I had on my wrist that was a tangible reminder of where my family were back in the real world. And it was a little shot of morale on my wrist every time I looked at it.
So you bought that for yourself before you left, and that was what number deployment?
So that was number 7.
Number 7, okay. Interesting.
Yeah. Up until that time, this was the Iron Man watch was the only watch I ever took downrange.
I wonder if it also had a certain effect. I think about this sometimes. Maybe you're leaving. You already know what war is like, and you've been there 6 other times, so you're probably already kind of anticipating the misery of war. So maybe having that to go with you, it was kind of like I've bought an excellent piece of kit. This will serve me well. I'll give you a little more confidence in going in there because your equipment can give you a lot of confidence.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. And candidly, I was a little more senior, and I was a colonel at that point, and my need to have a watch that could endure the elements and that I could drag through the swamps was a little less than it was when I was a young second lieutenant infantry officer. So, at the end of the day, it's a titanium watch, so it doesn't, it's reflective.
I do love titanium. That is.
Yeah. And it served all the fundamental features that I need, and yet again to that morale watch, perspective, it gave me that as well.
Yeah, it's incredibly light, lighter than some of the titanium watches I have. I wonder if they really are titanium. Yeah, and kind of going on with that gears off topic ish tangent. So I actually FaceTimed you in DC. Freaking out because I got plates that were too large for my plate carrier, and I'm like, oh my god! And they're sitting pretty low, not covering my heart or lungs or anything, and so I'm panicking, and so when your gear doesn't work, it sucks. But I managed to manhandle the large plates into my medium vest, and I felt better about it. And thankfully, nothing crazy popped off while I was there, and I didn't need the vest, but. So I think we've discussed a lot of different scenarios. We've had these watches in some criteria that make good watches, field watches that is. If you had $50, what would you buy like right now if you needed a watch to go into the field, go to war with? What would you spend $50 on?
Yeah, so that's a super easy answer to the question. Hands down, a Timex Iron Man watch. Right, it has everything you need, and nowadays you can get it in you don't have to do what I did and take it apart and spray paint it black. It comes in non-reflective materials. I think the Indiglo is probably still a little bright, but hands down for what it gives you and for the price point, I think it's tough to find a better watch.
So why not? Because my option is the G-Shock. I'm kind of biased to that because that was my first watch I bought for myself. Why not the DW 5600, the square?
Well, I think it's to the point you just made, is that this is the first watch I ever bought. And, it's been on my wrist. I know it, and it's never failed me. I'm a big fan of the G-Shock now because of your influence. But it was on, and at the time, it was more expensive. Much more expensive. Okay. The G-Shock was a high-end watch in comparison to the Timex Ironman at the time. And that's just a habit I've gotten into. I have come to appreciate the merits of the G-Shock watch. And you're right. Is that a good field watch for the price point today? Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's tough to go wrong. So really, at the end of the day, I think it's tough to go wrong with either the Ironman or the G-Shock if that's the first field watch that you want to purchase for under $50.
Yeah. Now the only other point I would bring up, Timex versus Casio here. Timex is, I don't know if it's still owned by Americans. I think maybe Swatch or someone got them. But at some point they were an American brand, and that is cool. As an American soldier, to have that. I've been repping Japan, so. But I would go with Casio G-Shock for another reason, in that you can mod them. There's a large modding culture for it. I've got bull bars on mine, and I've got a Barton watch strap. Stuff that you probably don't need, but if you're a young junior enlisted guy and you want watches that you can wear for more than just military stuff, having a G-Shock that you can customize and make your own has some added value in there as well.
Yeah, that's a whole thing with watches that I have no experience with whatsoever. So
I think we're gonna have to change that. I think I'm gonna try to get you that'd be a great new another episode to do if I pressured you into buying a Vostok and we modded it into a Planet Ocean, which I've seen online. I sent you a picture of, and we'll discuss Soviet watches versus American watches in that. But before we get to that, let's talk about if you had $5,000, what would you buy?
Well, so this is how I would choose to answer that question. I would want to buy a watch that had every feature that I could possibly need in a field environment or a combat environment. And frankly, I just don't think you need to spend $5,000 to get that type of capability. So my answer to that question is don't spend $5,000 on a field watch, right? And if you're going to, if it's really the maximum amount of capability, you're really going to have to take a look at the G-Shock watches out there. And there's several $100s if you're talking about one that's solar, atomic, things of that nature. But the idea that you're going to spend $5,000 on a field watch, to me, I just don't. I don't think that's a feasible thing to do, right? And there are some absolutely fantastic high-end. There's a Breitling out there that. I was just trying to find a little. It's the Breitling Cockpit. It's super lightweight. It's blacked out. It's digital and analog. And of course, this one's north of $9,000, as Breitlings tend to be.
Excellent.
And it's
attainable.
It certainly is a watch that has all of the attributes that we've discussed that are important in a field watch. But would you ever take it to the field? No. I mean, I guess you could, but that's not. I just don't think that's a good use of money to take a watch in the field that you're going to get dinged up, and if it fails and it breaks and it falls away and you lose it, you're not going to be torn up about.
Admittedly, I didn't give this one. It was my own question, but I didn't give it much thought. And I would agree 100%. You spend $5,000 as a private, I would counsel you, and you'd have to bring a battle buddy and a water source, because you are catching this corrective action. But it's probably financed with 50% interest too.
Yeah.
But yeah, $5,000, man, that's so much money on a watch that is going to get put in harm's way, literally. But if I was going to do that, it's not $5,000. I think the Xinyu 1 is a German-made watch, and a variant of it is issued to Germany's special forces, which is super cool. They're quartz watches, because at the end of the day, that's your most accurate.
Yeah, I kind of feel like the only people who buy and wear multiple $1,000 field watches are people who play soldiers in Hollywood, right? Sylvester Stallone, right? They'll spend that kind of money on a field watch because it looks good on camera. Mm-hmm. But real soldiers don't do that kind of thing. They buy a watch that has the capabilities that they need. And, if it costs $500-$600, so be it, because it provides extra capability. But, I think that, it's the features that you're looking for, and you can get all of the features you're looking for in a field watch for significantly less.
There's a guy on YouTube. His channel is Life is a Special Operation, and he's this lieutenant colonel. I don't know if he got promoted since, so sir, please forgive me. But he was given, his story is that he was given a Rolex Submariner when he graduated from the Q course by his uncle. And his uncle said, "How much did that watch cost you?" And he goes, "Nothing. You gave it to me." He's like, "Great. Now I want you to wear it like that." And so he has taken it on multiple deployments, Iraq, Afghanistan, doing whatever secret squirrel stuff he's doing. And it definitely has taken some damage over that time. So it's a truly worn Submariner. And at one point, Rolex was a producer for military watches anyway. So he's using it for its genuine purpose. And that watch is at least $10,000+.
Yeah, there's certainly, yeah, at the end of the day, again, if that watch gives you the capability that you need, then hey, that's a great field watch. I mean, Norman Schwarzkopf was famous for wearing a Rolex. Well, some people are not sure if it was a Rolex or something else, but and I think he wore a Rolex and a digital watch. So it's called doing a Schwarzkopf, where you wear two watches at the same time. And I think the story goes he wore that so that he could tell the time back in the States with his Rolex, and then he would, he'd have the local time on his digital watch. But I'd have to check my facts on that. But he would wear two watches, and one of which supposedly is a Rolex. And
or maybe he had the digital watch because, like me, he can't read the regular watch face. So.
Yeah. So if it's good enough for Norman Schwarzkopf, who I am a big fan of, then hey, you know what? It's good enough for me.
I did try that, and I sent you a picture of me wearing two watches on one wrist, and you said I look like the guy trying to sell you the watches.
Yeah. Well, he wore a watch on each wrist.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Which I've tried, but has never been comfortable.
No,
it's bizarre.
alien.
Yeah, it's very strange.
But I think we're going to wrap it up here pretty soon. The only other thing that just popped in my head, have you ever worn your watch, like, I can't do it, this is too tight on here, but with the watch on the inside of your wrist?
I have. I did try that for quite a while, for a period of time. And candidly, I only ever did that when I was in the field. Mm-hmm. But to use the word you just used, it felt alien, and it was not a habit that stuck with me very long at all.
Yeah, I've tried it too. And unless you're like, really in it, infantry, clearing houses, maybe, because I mean, when you're holding your weapon, you can look down at the time, mm-hmm. and that is, I had the convenience for that, but I'm not that high speed. I'm a weekend warrior, so I'm busy. And that's kind of it.
Actually, where I wore my watch when I was in the field, I didn't actually wear my watch on my wrist. I would wear my watch on my LBE. Back then, it was an LBE. Now we have Molly, and I would attach it to one of the metal rings, and then I could just look at it. Because
I actually did that, or I do that for land nav.
Oh yeah. See that's a.
Because I'll have my flick is what it's now. I don't know what the hell flick stands for. It's some sort of load carrying thing. But yeah, it sits like right here on the left side. So I can just check that, check my azimuth, all at once. I'm sure I probably could do that on my wrist, but it's a quicker line of sight just to look down at my chest, back up.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
But all right, let's go close her out. I don't know if you want to.
Well, thank you for inviting me to give some thoughts on that. I know this has been sort of a lengthy discussion, but it's really fascinating. Some of the things that, some of the topics we talked about, and how fundamental a good watch is, and what impact it can have on successful military operations and the morale of soldiers in general. I mean, these are things that I've never really thought about. So thanks for having me on, and you've given me a lot to think about. Thanks.
Well, I appreciate it, CWP. And with that, we're going to close out. Always ready, always there. Minuteman out.